State of Trees, January 2024. This is the webinar, first webinar for the year of 2024. And we will be revisiting the Miyawaki Forest, brought to us by Emmanuel and his colleagues last month. We'll be talking, Peder Nelson will be discussing this. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here last month. He wasn't feeling that well. But he will be talking about this today. So we're going to be revisiting this. This was an awesome webinar last month. We had, I think it was participants from 26 countries present last month. Yeah, wow. And that is a record for our campaign webinars. So great thank you to Emmanuel and the awesome team that he brought together, the awesome experts and personnel that he brought together, talking about this from the research side to the authorship side of things and everything in between. And then we will be having kind of a Peder will be talking. We'll all be talking, but Peder will, after the talking about Miyawaki Forest, we will lead into the year of the open science and what's going on with science and, what he's been working on and how it ties into the campaign and what, all of us are doing, especially also teachers and the student research, which then will bring us into, we're going to have a kind of an open discussion on IVSS 2024. And we're going to be asking, what are your needs and what are you thinking about doing with students? Or whether other classrooms that you may be participating with or working in for IVSS 24, because we are now in that period of submissions that began, I believe, in the middle of December, and it runs until March 6th, I believe, of 2024 for submissions to IVSS 2024. So thank you for joining. I'd like to throw a little quote out here now and then for inspiration. This is one by a guy named Charles Kettering. He is an American engineer, and you can see he's known for inventing lots of really cool things, including combustion engines as really kind of one of the unknown inventors of a lot of things automobile related and the technologies thereof. So he had this really cool quote that research means that you don't know, but are willing to find out. It sounds like such a simple statement, but it's a really powerful one because research, as you know, can take us anywhere. I always like the old thing, every time you do research and you find an answer to a question, 10 more questions pop up. That's research in a nutshell. So I love that. I just love this quote. I don't know much about Charles Kettering. I did some research looking up these things about the combustion engines and automobile technologies. And wow, this gentleman here was way ahead of his time. So really, really cool stuff. So I suggest, take a look at some of the history of Charles Kettering when you get a chance, when you get some free time. All right. So the agenda today, once again, introduction to metrics. I'll be doing that. And then Peder Nelson will be bringing us back to the Miyawaki Forest. And we'll have a discussion on that, a Q&A session with Peter Falcon leading that after Peter's done talking. And, definitely, Emmanuel, your thoughts will be appreciated, during this because you have been working with folks in Miyawaki Forest for a long time now. And Mike Jabot can pop in there because he is going to be doing something in Miyawaki Forest in New York very soon. So we can talk about that a little later. And then Peder Nelson will then head into the year of open science and talking about what's going on in this science world. What can you do and why you need to do it, as far as what the year of open science actually means. And then we will then lead into an informal discussion on, what are your needs for the Globe IVSS 2024, and that ranges from lots of things. And I have a couple questions I'll show you in a little bit. But it's basically, the overarching question is, what do you need? And when we talk about that, we're saying, what type of science do you want to be part of the webinars? What are some webinar topics that you want to see, prior to the closing date for IVSS submissions of March 6th of 2024? So we'll have an open discussion, and we'd love for all of you to participate, whether it be in the chat or unmuting your microphones during this time. So with that said, we have a little bit here. I kind of put those backwards. I don't know why I did that, but here we topped 90,000 tree height measurements since the beginning of the campaign, and we are closing in on 40,000 land cover and over 47,000 greening measurements, which gives us over 177,000 observations. And as you know, the reason why I showcase this is, that's a lot of data, but right now we're in that period, that kind of magical period of looking at change over time, and that's 5 years. So we have, 5 years of this campaign where, when we really look at change over time, NASA does this, kind of that gold standard of that starting to look at change over time is, what's been happening in the last 5 years, and of course, a lot longer than that with some of the satellite missions like, like Landsat, the Landsat series of satellites, which is around 52 years, of data. So lots of data there. But this is where we really, focus on looking at this data. And there are measurements that are part of these tree height, land cover, and greenings that are in the same location, throughout those 5 years. So you can actually see change because people have taken, whether it be Peder taking land cover measurements on Mount Hood in Oregon, in the same place, over the last 5 years, or whether it be someone taking a tree height observation in Argentina, around the same location several times during the last 5 years. We can see these changes. And, as you know, the GLOBE program has basically 3 ways to look at this data. They have the Advanced Data Access Tool, or ADAT, the GLOBE Visualization System, which is like what you see here on this map, this really cool, pretty map that you can put a satellite image background on it. Then we have the API, which is a little more advanced. Scientists like using this to, look at specific data during a specific time period. So, as you can see, we have this nice breakdown of, the 5+ years so far, including year 6, where we're getting these awesome measurements. And what I like to show about this is these flags on the right side is that we've had an increase in the total number of measurements each year of the campaign. You can see there's only a couple here, like from the 3rd year to the 4th year, not a huge difference, about 130 difference, but that was more. And then we jumped to 42,000. So now we're closing in on 10,000 measurements, for this part. So hopefully we'll get over that 42,112 until we hit the end of September of 2024. But I think we'll have a great chance of doing that. But yeah, this is a lot of awesome data out there for us to use, and what students can use in research projects, whether it's looking at tree height or land cover, or just using that data to study specific trees in their location, specific areas. We've had presentations and, IVSS projects over the years looking at, mitigating invasive species in parks by using land cover data. That would happen to be one that was in Croatia several years ago that we actually highlighted during one of our workshops for the campaign. So we are super excited, for all this data that's there. All right, so I wanted to showcase this. This was sent to us by the one and only Marcus Schuster out of Switzerland, and I'm just gonna, he pointed out here. There's a lot of cool stuff here. It's something. It's a thing that they do every week. It's called Earth Week: Diary of a Changing World, and they put this out every week. So, and there's the website out there, www.earthweek.com. And I want to draw your attention to the middle here where it says oldest tree. And I'm just going to read this here because this is really short, but I didn't know about this tree. But scientists have examined an ancient tree still growing in a remote part of central Chile's Alerce Costero National Park, claiming it would be the oldest in the world. It could be the oldest in the world. They believe it has survived for more than 5,000 years, making it older than California's 4,850-year-old Methuselah, the bristlecone pine, officially recognized as the world's oldest. Known as Gran Abuelo, or great-grandfather, the Patagonian cypress can be accessed by only an hour-long hike and is patrolled by a number of park rangers to make sure it is not harmed. And you can see a picture of it there. It's just, what a stunning picture of a tree there. It's just a huge tree. So I didn't know if, if Marcus, you wanted to mention anything about this, or even I saw Anna's on here. I don't know if she's ever seen this tree in person. I don't know, being down there. I know she's not in Chile, but Argentina. But Marcus, do you want to mention anything about the Earth Week? You can go ahead and unmute yourself if you like.
So I just mentioned it because I often use it at school in geography, because it's a very interesting site to find what happens every week in the Earth, and it's not only always bad news as in the other news, perhaps.
Yeah. That I like that it's not always bad news, because so often in the news we see, for instance, here in the United States, where I am on the East Coast, when I watch the morning news, usually about the first 15, 20 minutes of the news is usually bad news. And I don't like to wake up to that. But yeah, I really appreciate this, and that, there's lots of good news involved with this as well. So, but thank you so much for sharing this. And I recommend everyone checking out this earthweek.com site, because I've been looking at it since Marcus sent it to me last week. Anybody else have any thoughts on this?
Hey, Brian, I'll jump in here,
Yeah.
because I have ideas, but I actually Marcus, I really appreciate you sending this to us and highlighting, this global perspective that's out there. And I do think that, something like this could instigate some globe or globe collaborations between classes or between, countries. Showing something like this to students, you could ask the question of, what does that oldest tree look like, right? And make the connection to our globe partners that are there in that location. And so I really like this as maybe a way of bringing up, ways of collaborating, using this data to kind of drive some of those conversations. So that's one thing that I really, appreciate about people putting together a synopsis like this, because there is a lot kind of that's going on out there. The other thing that I would highlight is this is a great template to be able to apply to your local community, right?
Mm-hmm.
And have students actually kind of follow a similar sort of format. And I could see themes or other things like that where students work looking at maybe just the temperature, or they do the earthquakes. But I really like this as a way of starting to explore data, seeing what's important, and creating something that is could actually be a community asset if you kind of brought it down to that local school level. And so I like the icons too. That's one thing that I've been, as a map maker. Thank you, Marcus, for highlighting this, because that those icons are a really important piece about helping us organize. And I would encourage any classrooms out there, we need icons to make maps with, to be able to identify things. And so within the globe community, there's a place for art and a place for iconography like this. And I want to really just highlight that as a part of our science communication. And so, even though we focus so much on data, like Brian was just showing, how we synthesize that and communicate that out is really important. So, please use this as a guide for ways that you can help students synthesize and report out. I really like this type of format, and I know Dr. Rusty Lowe and I have talked about her examples doing climate chronicles, which is kind of similar in that same way. So, there's many ways of getting involved, and I really like this as short, direct, and thanks for highlighting this.
Yep, Peter, you hit the nail on the head there with synthesizing the data, and I think that's something. I think that's a true and valid obstacle that a lot of students have with their student research projects, whether they're going to do them or not. I mean, of course, there are students out there who will take on any obstacle, like that. But I think it's actually a really valid point you make there, that there's a lot of that data out there, but synthesizing it is not an easy task. And that's one of the things I think that the students, that we're trying to work with teachers and students to do this, because when you look at the globe landing page, down below the bottom part of the page, where it says, there's almost 300 million observations, that's very daunting to look at. Okay, with the ISAT-2 satellite that I work in, when we get our our weekly report, when I see a number like there's 7 trillion points of data from the satellite, I mean, I don't even know what to do with that number. That's just a massive number. But yeah, so I think the synthesis of the data that we're asking the students to look at, whether it be tree height or land cover or greenings or carbon cycle, I think that's one of the toughest things for students to do. All right, so I'm going to mention one thing here before I pass it over to Peter. In 2 days, some of you may have been part of this before, but monthly we hold the Globe Observer Connect event. And this one is going to be at 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Time on Thursday, the 18th of January. And it's going to be focusing on student research. And recently, students who are part of the SEAS program, which you heard Peter talk about, and I know our colleague and friend Cassie is on the webinar right now. SEAS is a STEM enhancement in Earth systems, and Peter and Cassie and Peter just mentioned Dr. Rusty Lowe. They have worked with students. They have been the mentors for these SEAS students, and they recently presented in San Francisco at the latest American Geophysical Union fall meeting. This was held in the mid-December. I attended that, and Peter Falcon did as well, and several of you on here. And there's also a part of this. It's part of the Earth System Explorer. There's also the Earth System Explorer program, which Globe Observer team members served as mentors, as I just mentioned. So they're going to be several students are going to be talking about their projects, and you will be able to ask them questions specifically about the projects that they have presented posters and the research work that they have been doing, over the last year or more. There's a link down here that you can learn more and register. I popped it into a bit.ly. It actually was from a Globe X post that we did, Twitter, but we have to call it X now. You can check that out, and this will take you to the Globe Observer Connect site. It'll showcase this and more of what you see here, and you can register to attend this on Thursday. So this is going to be a really cool event. And let me, before I pass it over to Peter, let me ask Peter and Cassie if there's anything they want to mention about this.
Oh yes, definitely, Brian. This is a great connection into what I'm going to talk about. But I will actually hand it over and ask Cassie if she has anything that she wants to add before I add my 3 to 5 cents.
Peter, I'm pretty sure you'll probably cover everything, but I know the teams are super excited to share the research that they've done, and Peter and Rusty were great mentors during it, so they have a nice opportunity to share with everybody.
Yeah, and thank you so much, Cassie, for helping to manage all of this. I mean, these students worked with us over the summer for about 8 weeks, and they actually did some machine learning. They used Python, they developed some code, and did some very high-level science with what they were doing. And so, to me, these are examples of what students are capable of doing. And so I really want to encourage people. Like this student right here actually won $40,000 award for her work. She took what we had done, but she actually created her own AI, artificial intelligence code, and she was able to actually get that published in a professional journal. And so that was the process that Rusty and Dr. Lowe and I were able to walk her through and help to support her as a young scientist. And, yes, that is at the very high achieving end of things. And she was very motivated. But yet you can see that she's getting the opportunity to actually share her science in a poster session, just like we're asking students to do in the IVSS. And so this is one example of what a project that a student did. Another one that I want to highlight is they actually used Globe Observer in all 3 of these projects. So they were not only collecting their own data, but they analyzed it and they then shared their information and their methods out to other people. And so, this is a great opportunity to see what might we be able to help students achieve, and what are their interests kind of moving forward. And importantly, how do we support these students who are moving from, say, high school or secondary school into their undergraduate and graduate, and starting to take on their professional career. So these were all really wonderful students, and I wanted to highlight that one of them that wasn't here. They actually they built their own sensor, and they used the Stella sensor to actually make measurements of different land cover types. So this is what we ask people to do. What is in that down photo? And they were able to show what a satellite might measure using that handheld device that we've highlighted in previous webinars. And that is the type of science that is brand new, Nobody else has done it. And so they were able to actually bring something to this professional conference of 20,000 people and share that out. And that is, to me, part of the really exciting opportunities that are available to us beyond just going out and making that measurement of the tree or doing some things like that. So, I encourage everybody to, join in live, but at least, send your questions if you have them to us on the Globe Observer team, and we'd be glad to help make that connection. The other project that I don't want to miss, because it relates right to our Trees Around the Globe student research campaign, is a student in California was really interested or concerned about wildfire. So they were looking at the environmental characteristics of past wildfires, and can they use that to predict the future and where fires might occur in the future. Again, very relevant for a lot of what we've been talking about. And they brought that question to us, and we mentored them through that. So that's really what we want to do today is make this connection between all these a variety of tools that are available, and really, try to show you how you can walk a student from, this question of how many trees are in my community to some of the satellite data, and how you make that connection is can be daunting for some students, but it's also a really wonderful opportunity to engage in this transformation that NASA is helping to lead the way in. And so what these students are doing really exemplifies this open science, this opening up of the conversation beyond just funded scientists. Here, we are inviting younger students, people who are interested in these subjects, to share with us what they are learning. So I could keep going on, but that's the whole reason for this, is to hear the students talk about what they did, why they did it, and to maybe adapt some of what they did to your particular location. That's the research side of it.
Quick question for you, Peter and/or Cassie. How long has the SEAS program been around? Do you know that? How long?
So I know the SEAS program itself has been running for at least 4 years, but probably longer, right, Cassie?
Yes, it has, Peter. I think we've been involved since 2018, and I believe that there's at least 2 to 3 years before we joined them.
Okay.
And yeah, go, Cassie. Sorry.
Well, I was going to say we joined as a virtual only program, because there was so many kids that couldn't attend face to face for travel reasons, and they asked if we could help out. So we became a virtual team then.
And we've been able to use all of the Globe Observer tools in particular, and use the diversity of locations to, again, help investigate local questions, but in this way that we've created some really interesting, dense data sets over the past 5 years, being able to work with students who are interested in this computer coding side of things as much as they are interested in, community science and what's happening there. So, it's to me, it's been really wonderful, and we've had teams that range from 30 or so in size all the way up to 100. So, this is something that Cassie and I can really help you with in terms of how can you actually manage a team like that? What do you do to give them the skills? How do you keep the conversation going and provide this wonderful mentoring opportunity? So we would be, that's again one of these things that we've been able to learn from and be able to bring the Globe community, into some of these new spaces, like being able to work virtually, all because of everything that this program has invested in and what people have done over the past 20 years plus.
Excellent.
So, I say right there, Brian, too. Anybody who's on this, there will be a call out for this next year for Earth System Explorers, or kind of that theme. And so we will be looking for students to join us, and so keep an eye out for that opportunity as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Peter and Cassie. Yeah, great program. And yeah, everybody, please join in if you can. These are recorded, correct? The Connect ones? Don't remember if they're recorded.
Yes, they are.
Okay, thank you. Yep, so they'll be recorded because I know 8 p.m. Eastern time is a little tricky for our folks in Europe and out further east than that. So it might be a little tricky time to get there live, but yeah, it'll be recorded, and they run about 30 minutes. So it's a very, very cool event. I did one, and I think I'm going to be the person going to be doing it in February. So because a new Globe Observer tree science blog will be coming out sometime this month. It's in review right now, and it's going to be focusing on the it's a wrap up of the NASA Moon Trees quest that we had for 3 months this summer into the fall, basically into the fall. So stay tuned for that. But there'll be more about that coming up. All right. With that said, I will go over and I really didn't talk to Peder specifically about this title, but it's one that we've had up here for a while. So, but I'm going to pass it over to Peder Nelson, and we're going to be coming back a little bit to the Miyawaki Forest. And please feel free, folks, like Emmanuel, and I know, like I mentioned earlier, Mike Jabat's on here. He's going to be doing some things in Miyawaki Forest pretty soon. So let me unshare, Peder, and I'll pass it over to you.
Great. Thanks, Brian. We'll pause for a brief break here while I switch my slides up. So. Okay, folks. Yeah, please,
Peder,
Larissa. Yeah.
Well, I was just trying to entertain folks during the slide change, but I guess it's a great moment to thank you, Peder, and Peter Falcon, and Brian, and also Professor Mike Jabat, as we teach students at the UN Institute for Training and Research. You spoke so eloquently and so a number of times, and it's just really an example how international community is really recognizing your work. And what Peder really so passionately emphasized, the importance of connections. And many thanks to Professor Jabat also, who is teaching this. We want to encourage all of you to think about this as an environmental science diplomacy through education. So, and I want to again stop talking about this, but I just want to emphasize how grateful the students are in the whole global community for the work that Brian, Peder, and Peter Falcon and Professor Jabat are doing there. And kudos to all of you. Thank you.
Larissa, that is wonderful to hear, and we definitely appreciate that, because this is a global endeavor, and it is, science is one of those things that for me is shared knowledge. We only learn when we share with each other, and that was one thing I really appreciated about these students stepping up into this really big 20,000 professional audience, and sharing what they have, and that to me is what I've come to learn about science. And I wanted to start off here, because what we're doing, NASA science is very, it's not just measuring those trees. It really is using the sunlight from that sun out there and how it interacts with different things in the earth. So I really want to stress that there is this wonderful resource that we want to bring into what we're doing, because it's not just about making those measurements outside. Globe really is about making that connection to the satellite data, and this is the transformation that's happening right now that I want to that we'll be going through. Is okay, you've made some globe measurements. Now what do? How do you connect that to the NASA science that's out there? And by NASA science, I really mean NASA's measurements of light, and how they're actually doing that from these satellites, from airplanes, from lower altitude drones, and also on the ground with us using our mobile apps to do remote sensing. Okay, so I want to encourage everybody to go back and look at this and see, is there a place where you might actually be able to help students understand how we go from that sunlight into an image. And this is exactly what we're doing when we use our device to make these measurements. And that's part of what makes that introduction to remote sensing really valuable, because the students, when they take those pictures, they're doing that, and we can help them to understand what is that blue light, what is that green light, and what is that red light. And then importantly, how does that relate to what NASA puts in front of us and what they show? So this is a really valuable just intro that has graphics. It has this wonderful description of thermal imagery, which I think is a really important part of what we talk about here. Because that's part of what we see with land cover, with different types of land cover, is we actually see vegetation growing or changing, and how we actually make sense out of this, can be really challenging. And but there is this resource and several other resources that that Globe has put together, and I want to again emphasize: go use these learning activities. Yes, there has been some technology changes and maybe some other things like that, but you have a lot of learning activities available to you right here, especially as we start thinking about what is the accuracy of this data in my location, not just globally. That might be really useful to understand what's happening there. But as we were showing earlier, being able to bring this down to what's happening in your community actually, goes into assessing how those maps, that data is describing your location, right? And that's really the big thing that we're doing. And so I want to take it back here, because I'm always surprised when I go back and look at what the Globe community has created over the years. The foundations are really solid and really there. Doing an accuracy assessment, doing a change detection. Why do you do a change detection? Those things are right there for you to take advantage of. And so, please use that as you're helping students finish or work on their project over the next 2 months. And again, this also includes that phenology piece. Looking at phenology, why does this matter? And this piece of phenology, one data point is interesting. It tells us something at this moment in time. But this is a really important characteristic of maybe a changing climate that we'll see, right? And so, these are wonderful ways that you can bring this in to your current investigations. Now, recognizing these are 10 years old, this is what we want to be able to focus on and update. And so this is an opportunity for students to actually help the Globe community update and maybe find an experiment and find a new way of making a change detection or thinking about phenology. And I want to highlight that phenology is something that's being recorded in your ground photos, right? Like, I've got snow behind me. What month might you think that this image was taken in? If you're in the Northern Hemisphere, it could be anywhere from October to April, right? But if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, it might be anytime between May and September. It could be very different, right? So, an image gives us some information. We can attribute it. We can label what's inside of there. And that's what tells us the story of what's happening in that location. And if we go back to the same place and take photos, do that remote sensing, that's where we start being able to do change detection. But we need to make sure that we document when this was taken, where it was taken, and even importantly, what was the device or satellite that was used, to record this. Okay, so some of that is recorded here in these phenology or in these different activities in those protocols that Globe has. But I also want to highlight that why we're doing this is to share that knowledge. It's to provide a long-term archive of what people are observing, okay? And that is incredibly important for climate change, for monitoring things, for being able to go from that, that's interesting, snow, to, oh, there's snow there all the time, and that means something. And so, there's a lot of complexity that can come out, but you can always start with these photos as a hypothesis. If you go back to this location, will you see the same thing, right? So this is kind of the exciting part to me, is we're not just talking about numbers necessarily. We're talking about patterns. We're talking about being able to build a hypothesis, maybe even based on the numbers or the observations or what people have been doing in that location that might not be in the GLOBE database. Okay, so this is where I want to share with you here. I'm gonna kind of change around what Brian's order here, because this to me is a change in the way that we are doing science these days, and it wasn't really possible very long ago. And the internet, the power of the internet, the fact that people are getting connected in ways that they previously hadn't, opens up this idea of open science. And this is something that the GLOBE program has exemplified from the very beginning. What I just showed you is an example of sharing methods, and also the GLOBE database is a place that you can find all of that data. It may not be perfect, it may have some issues with it, but that is at least a place where we can start evaluating and archiving and putting things together in a way that allows us to actually share our data together. Okay, and this is again transformational, and I'm highlighting this here because this is an open science curriculum that has been put out there to help people understand this this new way that we're really trying to encourage our young scientists to adopt. And our three speakers who we've been mentoring, who will be at that GLOBE Connect presentation, have really taken this ethos of open science and brought it to their community. And so, there is the idea behind what open science means. How do you actually work in a way that you get credit for the work that you're doing, but you also are sharing what you learned, and so other people don't do the same things. They don't make maybe the same mistakes, or they're able to really do that change detection in a way that's meaningful, because you have actually described the way that you collected that data, and any sort of nuances related to it. The open tools is a really important piece, because previously, including even in what we were sharing there with the biosphere, open tools and being able to get the software to be able to analyze the data has been a problem. So we have tools now that allow us to actually share the not only the results, but the code and the data and the methods that all led to that synopsis. So we really want to encourage our students to explore and find out what are these tools that are open and available that they can use, usually just through a browser. But also, what are the limitations of these? And we only learn that by actually going through and trying to use them and finding out, oh, this doesn't work for this question, or I need different data, or wow, it worked perfectly in my area, and now I have some results that I can share out, right? And finally, we're really looking at how to share this out. And so data is citable. It is something that you can actually put together and present. You don't always have to go through and do the full analysis of some of these data sets. In fact, we need a lot of just descriptions of data, and and they can be used for in a variety of purposes. And so our GLOBE data is one of those, where some scientists will take that and compare it to ISAT-2 data, and that laser data. Other scientists might take it and combine it together with their field data, which they also compare it to or use aerial photos or some other remote sensing data like that. But the key here with our data is you want to be able to describe why the data looks the way that it does. What is the minimum tree height that you have found in your community? What's the maximum tree height that you found there? Why do you have that range of values? Was it expected? Was it not expected? If somebody did the same thing, would they come up with the same results or something similar? So actually sharing our data, you are doing when you use the Globe database. And that is one thing I really, really appreciate about the program and everybody who's taken part and people who are continuing on, because data is one of those things that is valuable. And it has been a bottleneck because people in the past have held on to data for 3, 5, 10 years, and we miss the signals of change or of climate experiences during that time. And so, you know, NASA's really working on trying to get data out there fast, okay? But also recognize that that data needs to be screened for its use in your particular question, okay? And this gets into, is this measurement in the same place I made my measurement? Okay, and so one thing that is becoming possible, and we had a lot of students working on this, and we can share with you, but I would really love to see a Globe code base that allows our students to actually share what they develop working with Globe data and help others learn how to take that and combine it together with satellite data and have a result. Okay, so to me, this is a great opportunity for students working on the International Virtual Science Symposium. They can actually share their code. They can get it cited in a way that that helps them make connections and maybe help the rest of us understand what's in this database. And this is, again, something that previously has been a challenge for us, not only in the Globe community, but also, globally. And so how you do this is an important piece that we're trying to teach young students these days, okay? And that leads to this idea of actually sharing your results and sharing your results in a place that other people can access it, okay? So this is the ethos of open science right here. And if you have students who are inclined, they can go in and they can take this this training and get badges for every single one of these modules that they go through, and culminating in an overall open science badge. And this is something that they get from NASA. It's something that shows the rest of the world that they are also committed to open science. And that's what I've heard from this community. And I want to encourage all of us teachers, all of the students out there to think about this idea of science and how and the way that we actually do it so that it benefits all of us. The only reason why we have these satellites collecting data for us is because of a global community coming together to either build these instruments or to maintain them or to actually share the data in the downloading of it as the satellite passes over. So, remote sensing from space is a global activity that requires all of us to actually work together. And so, I wanted to kind of flip this around because the Globe visualization system is one place and one way of seeing the data that's available and what has been collected. And I want to, again, really kind of highlight that one of the first things that we need to describe is, where did we take our measurement? Okay. And that's, I want to stress that because that leads into what you can do with NASA's measurements or with the satellite measurements. And it also really determines whether somebody else can go back and repeat those measurements again. Okay, so when it's really much better for our students to not only make that measurement, but then to also go back and describe that location, how they did it in a way that's repeatable. Okay, again, we're not just searching for answers. We're searching and we're researching those answers, and we're working together to make sure that what the numbers that we're getting are reasonable, and we're doing that check on each other. And it's a weird thing. I get concerned when people look over my shoulder and point out errors that I have, but that's one of those skills that we want to develop as well, is humility with what we're doing. I'm blind to what's happening in South America. The tree that Brian showed earlier is something I've never even heard or thought about before. And that is why we work together, is because I have a limited view of my world. I have particular sun angles and sunlight that are influencing where I live that are different than somewhere else. Okay, and that is what is getting recorded by these NASA satellites. So, I wanted to take us here because, again, I wanted to really just kind of highlight what, when you go in here, this is open data. Okay, and that's interesting. We're getting a lot of cloud photos, not exactly what I was expecting, right? So I want to highlight how we actually have a little bit of a hypothesis of what to expect in locations around the world. And that's because we're not starting from scratch, right? In fact, we have, if you go into here, you can see that we have satellite measurements. We have some things that can inform us what to expect if we go on the ground out there, okay? And to me, this is a really powerful piece, because sometimes we have data, right? And sometimes we don't have data. And one of the first things that is really important for us to do is to see and recognize that there's gaps in our remote sensing data. And so how can you answer a question if you have gaps or you have missing satellite data? It makes it really challenging, but I really want to stress that that is part of our challenge from space. And that is why these ground observations and measurements are so valuable, because as you can see, sometimes we have clouds. We can't see what's underneath those clouds sometimes, in many cases. We actually have things like sunlight glint that are occurring in our satellite images. So even though these are really powerful tools, we have reasons to actually investigate and to bring our understanding on the ground to these satellite measurements. Okay, and so using all of this together allows us to describe the data that we collected. And that is really powerful, because that is what gives people confidence in your assessment of what happened in that location, right? And so that is part of this big science process. So I wanted to kind of highlight one of the first things that you're wanting to do when you look at data for a location, and this could be because you planted trees in that location, or because you're wanting to see what has happened in somewhere that's similar. I want to stress, we have this date and time that these things were collected. This is really important to recognize, that this is a data point, right? And we want to recognize and start thinking about how we organize our dates and time. And some of us have daylight savings time. That causes some confusion because we are not consistent. So just understanding, what do we expect to see in August in the year 2023 in this location. That's a hypothesis that can be built up before students go out and actually make a measurement, right? You can look at the satellite imagery, and from that, you might say, oh, we'll see some buildings, or we'll see some trees out there. We might see grass that's green, right? Or it might be brown. And then the question becomes, well, why is it that color? So I wanted to really emphasize, that you can use these photos as a hypothesis if you tie it to the date. And I want to, highlight this particular one. I'm going to make it bigger because there's a hypothesis here. Where would you find the sun in any of our photos? If you're in the Northern Hemisphere, we would never expect to see the sun in a North photo. And so when we're looking through our photos and thinking about them scientifically, that's one of the questions that we really want to consider is this expected? Is this what I would expect to have in this location? Would I expect to have a tree that could be measured? Would I expect to see the sun in this particular photo? And here, what we're actually seeing is the sun angle at this moment in time, in this August timeframe, right? And so sun angle is a really simple thing that does allow us, and has historically been what we've used to identify or try to show the height of our trees. We actually use that shadow length as a way of making that measurement, right? Now, Brian's given us another wonderful tool, both lasers in space, but also with using the handheld clinometer in the app, right? But don't forget that the reason why we know the Earth is round is because of measurements of sun angle throughout the year and comparing that to other locations around the globe. So sun angle is a really important part of how we can describe a location in terms of the vertical height and what's in that location. And would we expect ICESat-2 or one of these satellites to measure a tree in that location? Or again, would we expect it to be giving us no tree height, no vegetation, a value of 0 because of what we see or what we might expect in that location? Okay, so I'll go back because, here on this particular date in August, we are actually seeing the sun in the east photo, right? And we're actually seeing it low because we can see this bright spot in our photos. And in remote sensing, we call that a hot spot. It is a place that is really white and illuminated because of that sunlight. And you can see that as you move away from that white area where the sun is, we actually see the atmosphere change blue colors, right? So it's always important for us to know where the sun is at when we're making our recordings. And if you go back to the same location, here, wow, the sun is now in the south photo and it's really high up. I can actually see the sun itself in this photo. So, to me, this where do we expect to see the sun in either our east photo, our south photo, our west photo, or even our north photo? Actually is a really interesting question. And it goes into something that these students are showing us, which is shadow length of the tree, right? So this is another way that when you look straight down from space, sometimes we'll only see a little bit of that green tree, but we'll see this shadow on the ground. And that shadow on the ground actually is an indicator that there's a tree there. And sometimes you can actually use the shape of that shadow to tell what type of tree it is. Okay, so shadows at different times of the year are a really important way that we've been able to track change over time in a location. And this is really what we see from space. And so, when we're talking with Emmanuel about, the planting of these forests, one of the big things that we are seeing is shadow changes as these trees grow. Okay. And that is a wonderful, fun thing to, just make these connections between the sun and our built environment around us, and how it can actually give us an indication of the height of these, of the things in that pixel. Okay. So shadow is a really fun piece of our environment that is really, really informative. And so that's part of how these ground photos from land cover are a rapid assessment, because we can, if we're out there at the same time of day, and at this, in the same month, we can use these shadows to actually understand where the sun is at in the sky, and make measurements of the tree height, or what we think that tree height could be. So, the sun-earth connection, the sun angles throughout the year are not consistent. And this is something that is really important and is embedded within our globe data because of the date that's recorded, the time that's recorded. And then I'll highlight that going back, you have to go to the site info, but we have the latitude and longitude of these locations. Okay, so this is a really valuable part of being able to go back to that location, or being able to tie it to satellite data. Okay, and so one thing I really want to stress is we have a hypothesis at this point. We have a measurement that was taken at this latitude and longitude, and we have some information here in the photos that tells me what I should expect when I go to the NASA data. Okay, so right there, I have an expectation of what the data will show me. I have a hypothesis about that. Now, walking through that and starting to get a sense for what you would expect to see in a location is science. It is that hypothesis generation. And I want to really emphasize that, because, when I look at this upward photo, I don't see any trees. I see a clear sky. And so again, when I go and use some of the tools that we've highlighted in the past here, it gives me an idea that I should not be seeing a certain classification, or a certain number, a certain height, right? And right now, I really want to emphasize that don't just take the numbers that you find in a spreadsheet or in a database. You really need to do some investigation of the data itself to make sure that you're not getting led astray. And what I mean by that is this thing that has happened, where if you don't have your latitude and longitude correct, we don't end up in the right place. I'm going to extend this out. Our photos, our data points can end up in the completely wrong location. And this is something that is emphasized in the GPS protocol. But we have some errors inside of our database that I really want students to first think about. So if you're looking for data and you're wanting to know what's happening in the polar areas, you can see that, oh, wow, we've got some photos over here in Siberia, and we have some photos over here in Alaska. Well, maybe I can use those things together to understand what's happening in that part of the globe. What's happening with the trees, the permafrost, things like that. And here we really see the sun angle change a lot. So our tree shadow lengths get really, really extended. Okay, so that's why you need to really be thinking about the latitude, longitude, and this round Earth, but where the sun is at that time that you're making your measurements. Okay, and the reason why I want to highlight this is because here I'm finding an observation in the year 2021. Okay, that's useful. I can find out what NASA missions and data was collected in this year at in this February timeframe on the 24th day of that month at this hour. what is really, again, kind of interesting is we have the sun in our south photo. Okay, that makes sense for where we are in the northern hemisphere. And then when we go through, oh, okay, I wasn't expecting the downward photo to include my sky and horizon. So this is actually not a valid data point for what we would expect to see in a downward photo, right? We would expect to see snow or the top of this. So this is something that we want students to start recognizing what they would expect to see in a data table. And so, this is something to me that, well, how we handle this data point becomes part of that conversation of what we do with the data. And here again, this upward photo, is it what we were expecting for the upward photo, right? We were expecting, like we saw before, which was a view of the sky and what's vertically above us. Okay, so we have some data that is useful. And in fact, here, one of the things that, again, as we talk about phenology, because we have a date and we have a location in the world, I can actually see that there's leaves on these trees, but there's this snow piece, right? And if somebody went back to this location in summer, would they expect to see snow? Would they expect to find the sun in that same location? And those are definitely the type of questions that come from just looking at some of these photos, the data that we've been collecting inside of Globe. So the final thing that I want to mention here and want to stress before I take us to one of our other topics that I want to stress for us today is this in the location on the map that I would expect it, right? And so this, according to the map, is Siberia. It is in Russia. But I noticed that the school is Eagle Community School. And if I follow this link, one thing that I'll find is that the Eagle Community School is in the state of Alaska. Well, wait a minute. If they collected this information, but it is showing up in our database over in Russia, okay, that's not correct, unless maybe I need to contact them and ask them, did you really collect information or data in this location? Is that valid? Because the metadata is telling me that somebody from Alaska or a school in Alaska collected this. Okay, so before we can really use this, even though we've gone through and done some attribution and we've looked at that, maybe came up with a question, that next question, as I look at the data, I want to make sure that this is in the right place, right? And unfortunately, what we know about this location is that, in fact, our latitude is correct, but our longitude is missing the minus sign. And so because of that missing sign, it is getting put into the wrong location. And so what you do with that is part of what a scientist needs to figure out. What do you do with data that is incorrect? Maybe you can go in and fix this and add the correct sign, and it will be in the correct location. But right now, when we go to the satellite data, this information is not going to align correctly. And that is not correct for what we need to do. We need to make sure that we're talking about the same thing that other scientists are talking about. So please pay attention to the latitude, longitude, and even elevation, but pay attention to these values. How many decimal points are there? And is that valid? Is that reasonable for what we did and how we made our measurement? And I'm really emphasizing this piece because it does go into our ability to track changes over time, to be able to describe the world correctly. And so, you know, I want to really kind of highlight here that the GLOBE database has a lot of good, valuable information in it. But right now, science is all about trying to filter this big data and find the useful information that is correct all throughout the data you're going to use for your exploration. So, you know, quite honestly, a student might have to go through and describe this data, and they may not be able to actually answer their question. But I want to encourage that is okay. Actually describing to the rest of us that there's problematic data or there's data that needs to be cleaned up, that then becomes you publishing. You end up describing this, and that becomes something that other people can use because it has been described in a way that gives confidence with it. And I really want to emphasize that this is what I've spent my time doing when I'm looking at changes over time. This is one of the most challenging pieces when you're looking at 50 years of data or 25 years worth of data. And so, you know, as we think about tracking changes over time, we really want to describe our data in a way and collect our data in a way that is repeatable, okay? And is something that can be combined together with other data sets. So I'm highlighting this specifically because, in fact, we've highlighted in previous webinars that if a student or if we made our measurements in a way that we are confident in the location, you can then go to a lot of these open tools that will then give you the satellite measurements that are in that location. And it's at that point that you can start seeing, oh, this is the height that I set to that satellite measured. And this is what I measured. Okay, we're talking about the same things. And so, you know, that step has not been done for all the measurements in the database. That's actually a big part of the first steps in our science process right now. And so I want to highlight that part because that's where where student can really help us understand what is the valuable data points in all of this raw data that's been collected. And then also recognizing that NASA data isn't always correct either. That, you know, if you go to a place like this and you get numbers back, well, are those numbers reasonable? What did NASA do to describe that data set? Or what did a scientist do to describe that location? And you know, exploring that is a really important part of describing and understanding the uncertainty of our measurements, because nothing's perfect. There's always going to be differences when people research, but hopefully they're close enough that we can see the same patterns, the same shape of data, and we start gaining confidence in not only what we've done, but also what is available out there. And that is an ongoing piece of things that that's the reason why we have so many versions of data sets. And so finally, I want to stress that it's really important to cite the version, the location, the data that you are actually using, because Globe Observer was just updated, and now within the land cover tool, you could add 4 more photos than you previously could. So, you know, why the data looks the way that it does before that update is because of the way that it was collected. And this is just that challenge of science over time is we get new technology, we get new methods, and we get new ways of doing things, but we document that so that others can follow along and then understand a little bit better about why are we getting the results that we are in some of these data points that we have actually highlighted for you all, right? And, you know, and zooming in on, you know, some of these locations that we've sort of been highlighting, you know, there's a lot of different ways of describing that particular location. And so, you know, we have a lot of data at our fingertips at this point. And I really want to stress that, yes, there are data sets that are showing these things, or that might indicate that there's something happening there, like reforestation, right? They're seeing a shadow change in the satellite imagery. Maybe they're not able to see the ground in the way that they were because it's now covered in trees. You know, all of those things are sort of described back in the globe protocols in the biosphere. And so I wanted to just spend a little bit of time going through this before I kind of ended with another tool that is incredibly valuable for us all. Okay, so again, if you've gone through and you have your latitude, longitude, or you have your study area, finding data is always the hard one, right? The one that I showed you, the appears tool, you've got to register. Okay, so that is a barrier to our open science, is actually having to register for sites. That's been an issue for us all along. But there is this wonderful tool called EarthMap that is connected to the United Nations and is supported by the Food and Agricultural Organization there. They focus on tree height a lot, but also agriculture and other things. So they, again, like many of what we've shown, you know, you can go in and you can do some countrywide assessments. Okay, and here we'll just you know, zoom in on Belize, just you know, for an example. But what I really like here is that they're providing you some of these outlines at a district level, and then even watershed level. Okay?
Hey, Peter.
Yes, Brian.
We're still seeing the GlobeViz system tab.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's been a little. I think it's a rendering. I think it's a rendering lag with GlobeViz. That's happened before.
Yeah.
So,
all right.
yeah.
Let me.
I just wanted to pop that in there real fast. So.
No, that's great, because if we're not seeing the same thing, we can't be talking about the same thing. Okay. EarthMap.
It's
So
still loading up. It's still loading up.
Thank you.
It's dark right now.
All right. My internet must be slow, so let me get rid of myself.
On my side, I can see the Earth map.
Okay, good.
So I can see Peter moving around.
Thank you.
Yeah, I can see it too.
Yeah,
good.
got it.
All right. Thank you guys for that that confirmation. So, you know, again, one of the things that we've provided some other tools. You know, this comparison between what is happening locally and what is happening at the national scale is a big question, right? You know, are students finding the same things, or are they in a different area? So I, again, you know, wanted to highlight that, you know, these are country boundaries, which we don't have any other place. So that's something to pay attention to. You know, but here they actually, they provide you these outlines, and you can go in and actually see things like, you know, biomass emissions, and you can see some of these things that we were talking about in terms of the connection between trees and climate and carbon. Okay. And there's just a variety of data sets that are in here that previously were in individual locations. But this is the open science that I'm talking about. And if you go down to the forestry one, wow, okay, there's a lot of layers here, right? And so, you know, one of the first things is just, what are the numbers for above ground biomass? What does that mean? And what do I find in my location? So, you know, again, this is a way that you can get at some of those numbers that even get at canopy height, the forest changes over time. And you can, again, do it at this level, or like I found, you know, you can go in and you can look at a particular watershed. And that seems to be something, you know, that we're really interested in. What is happening in my area? And so you can, you know, click on that and you can go through and get some statistics. It looks like it did something weird on me on that side. But I'm raising this particular tool that went sideways on me, as an example of open data that's out there where you don't have to have a registration. You can do some summaries and you can actually do some investigations into data sets that describe your particular community. Okay. And we'll give a deeper tutorial on using this earth map because it actually does have a story map component to it. And so there is this connection between the data and presentation that you can explore that the United Nations has put together through this. And since, as Larissa highlighted, global diplomacy is one of our big missions here, having data that actually is consistent across all of our globe countries is the only way that we can actually have these conversations. And so that is part of what you're seeing here is this emphasis on global data sets that we really need to tie to local conditions in the way that I was highlighting there. And that's what we're doing here in our campaign. And so, I could keep going on, but I want to, end with, there is, this Global Forest Observations Initiative that is out there that is part of the reason why that Earth map exists. Okay. We're not alone trying to understand the trees in our community. In fact, at a national level, many of the globe countries are trying to do the same thing. And so there's a variety of these tools and data sets that are being produced that need some comparison to ground data, like what we're doing here in Globe. And, there's a lot of reasons for this, but part of what we're trying to do with our students here and the tools that we're showing you is to embed it within this larger initiative that is happening. So it's not just that we're doing science for our own sake to gain some skills or that kind of thing, but it is because there is this global effort to really understand and track what is happening in particular locations. And why people are planting them where they are, like Emmanuel has highlighted, is a really important piece of this measurement, reporting, and verification that is going to be the future of all of our students and the future of really the globe world is looking at and being able to contribute to these initiatives like this. Okay. I've gone on for quite a bit, and I know there's a lot of messages in the chat there that I did not at all see at this, but I want to open it up at this point. I've covered this open science piece very in depth, and again, that's because that is the world that we're training young scientists to go into, but also people like me are transforming the way that I do my science. And so it's a wonderful opportunity to, get together and all of us share new methods, new ways of doing things while building on past successes. Okay, I'm going to stop right there and let Peter or Brian or anybody else ask some questions. In our last couple of minutes here, about where would you like us to go?
Well, you took us everywhere around the world, and we apologize for the Zoom. It looks like it's a bad day for Zoom, as your voice would kind of come in and out, and there's a little bit of a lag. But we worked through it. Yes, a lot of questions. I'm going to see if we can get to them very quickly. Since you covered so much, I'm going to kind of partition the questions. So this first couple questions is for the Open Source 101 site that you showed us earlier in your presentation. And let me scroll around. Let me see if I can find it. Lorraine asks about these open science modules. What age range is this appropriate for?
Yeah, So it's really aimed at undergraduates and higher. But again, depending on the students that you're working with, they might be able to just jump right in and actually be able to do it, especially in computer science classes or that kind of thing. But it's right now currently kind of aimed at that higher audience. However, the information behind this is open as well, and there's a few of us who want to adapt this and make it available for more high school and junior high type of audiences. But some of it goes into registering for a particular ID or some of those kinds of things. So I recommend a teacher goes through it first and maybe pulls out what they think is most important. But the students that I've been mentoring and working with are they could do any of these things, and it's just kind of a matter of providing that structure to the students.
Gotcha. Yeah, we understand when you're working with data, it can be very daunting because there's so many different versions. You can get binary, you can get raw data, gridded, global data. Is this in a way where, as you mentioned, in these comments, students would be able to kind of quickly understand it, or without a science background per se, would it be something that
Yes.
is easy to understand?
Exactly. Yeah. And especially, even if you don't go beyond just that ethos of open science, that module one is really good in terms of helping to set the stage for why we're doing what we're doing. And then, module 2 is really about, well, how do you share things? And so NASA has provides some examples and some things like that will work in some schools and may not work in others, but it really, finding the right tool is part of the challenge that all of us have. And so in that, NASA people are providing some of us, guidance with where to go, how to do things. So to me, this is the beginning of our conversation around this. And I really want to encourage everybody here to explore this and to help us all within the Globe community build the things that we need that represent this ethos and these tools, and yet make it perfect for our audience.
Thank you. And Mike and Lorraine both have comments. Mike mentioned that he's using it with his university students as well as some high school students now. And Lorraine said it would be wonderful if we could adapt it for middle school and high school. So that would be an amazing component to kind of reach out to a younger audience and break that fear of using data for them at a young age.
No, that's exactly right. And, because, Peter, as you were saying, okay, you're handed a spreadsheet of numbers. Well, what are those numbers? What do they mean? What's the range of it? It's just like, and is that expected? What units are they in? There's a lot of investigation that needs to go into that before you can actually do the fancy things that people want to do. Before you could make an AI, you have to make sure that you're feeding it good data. Otherwise, it will hallucinate, is a term that you might hear. It will give you wrong answers. And so, that's part of the reason why we check each other's work, we check each other's numbers. But that is where scientists are spending a lot of their time, is trying to review these data sets and make sure that they are diverse. They have all kinds of different perspectives. They include everybody in the world. And that's what the Globe community is all about, right? And so if we can take that ethos and that idea, we can actually really help fill in the gaps that scientists are finding as they go through and try to create these really cool tools that students want to be part of, but may not really understand how they can contribute. And data is the first place.
Great, thank you. So if we can go over to the Globe website that you're showing us, the Viz tool. First off, Bushra just mentioned he loves the detail that you talked to us about and all the new terminologies that you're sharing, like hotspot and the one you just mentioned right now. So that's awesome.
Yeah.
Anna had a couple great questions I just want to get to. One, she made a comment about crops, because crop areas are quite complex because they have very drastic changes in uncover and identification using satellites. So using satellite images is difficult. You did ask a question about shadows. If shadows are very important for the relationship between temperature and tree cover, what would be the best way to measure shadows at a particular time?
Yeah. Okay. So I love this. You know, so one thing is it's always good to line up your measurement with a satellite measurement or an aerial photo measurement. That's kind of the best, the gold standard. But what I've actually done, Anna, is when I do my cloud or when I do my tree height, I will actually stand at the very top of that shadow at that point in time. And then when I'm actually taking my photo, I'll actually have the sun behind it, and you know, and sort of using that, and so I can actually give where is the tree, what direction is it, where's the sun at that location, and then as I walk, I'm actually recording how tall that shadow is. Um, and so, you know, that's a way that I've actually used Tree Tool to record that shadow length and that shadow height of that particular location. Now, it gets more complex if you didn't go out there at the same time, but almost all satellite imagery does record what is the height of the sun, what is the altitude of the sun, and where is it in the sky? What is the degree angle that it's at? Is it in the south? Is it in the north? And that can actually be used to identify or help to identify something like solar elevation. And so, you know, here I just pointed at a place in Argentina, and you can actually see that depending on where you are in the sky or year, you will have the solar angle will be less. And so we need to know where the sun is at approximately in the sky. Luckily, NASA's been tracking that for a long time. So there's a lot of tools that can help you to see where we expect to see the sun on a particular date. Okay. But if you don't know the date of when an image was taken, whether on the ground or from above, you are really limited with your utility, because as you can see here, the sun is not consistently in one place. And so this is a variable that we need to account for. And how this relates to that shadow length, just go back to the same tree at the same time of day, you know, at different times of the year, and you will actually notice and have your students be able to really understand that influence of sun and your location. And to me, this is something that is a lot of fun to do with Globe Observer. Where do you expect to see that sun? Is it going to be in your east photo, your south photo, your north photo, or is it going to be in one of your cloud images, you know, up at that same thing? So, you know, this is a really important part about, you know, historically the way that we have estimated tree height. So there's a lot of information you can find on the web about how to take a shadow length, walk its length, and do some algebra or geometry, or you know, to be able to estimate the tree height. And I think that's actually in the trees part of the protocol, and you know, why you do the clinometer and some things like that. So Anna, you know, my recommendation is you can go out and use the tree tool to estimate shadow lengths. You can also, you know, just like a oh, I forgot the word for it right now. But you can actually, you know, go out through the whole day and record where the sun is at and where the shadow is at, and be able to track it through time. Again, indicating you know, how hot something might be getting because it's in shadow or it's in sun. And also, you know, a lot of information about like what ends up happening with our climate as the sun angle changes throughout the year. So there's just a lot that you can go into with something as simple as where a shadow's located, and using trees to kind of help us to indicate that, because the shadow might move, but hopefully the tree trunk doesn't.
Gotcha. And she also wrote in the comments that the science club that she manages They do measurements in surface and air temperature in urban areas, and they combine that with tree height, with trees to see their influence. But she currently doesn't do shadows, but maybe that's something that her students can do in the next phase.
Exactly. Yeah. And like I said, Anna, I mean, to me, this is one of these things that when you move into surface temperature, the shadow piece is a really important part about why you are getting the numbers you are, and maybe why the patterns look the way that they do. And so, as you move from the land cover at that location into the next question of, well, how hot is it in this location, and how might these trees or the tree canopy change things? That right there is to me a really important part about why shadows are important. It's that canopy cover. I'll kind of end here with the phenology piece. Is actually, you want to go out when during leaf off conditions. So if you see deciduous trees during the summer, go back out there during the winter, because that is a very different dynamic, and that's actually how we know the quantity of deciduous trees that are out there. So that question in Globe Observer, do you see leaves on a tree, really goes back to this important question about sun angle and phenology, and what how much of that tree cover do we have throughout the year, and why, and how might that influence something like surface temperature.
Thanks. She did mention that perhaps making shadow measurements in the summer would be a great idea. So
I agree. Yeah. And along those lines, one of the things that when we talk about shadows and this, where the sun is at, we get into the solar potential of that area. Can you actually put solar panels out and gather sunlight, to actually power your community? Well, that's, this curve right here, where the sun is out in the sky, where the shadows are you going to get shadows from trees or from buildings? That becomes a really interesting and important question when we're thinking about energy in our community and where we get it from, and whether solar panels could actually provide enough power, especially during this winter time frame when the sun is a little lower in the sky, may not be producing as much energy as when you're out here collecting that information, during the height of summer. So, this is remote sensing right here, is this curve. And that's part of the reason why things look green, and why you might see certain numbers in your satellite data.
Thanks, Peter. So one more question, because we wanted to move forward for something else. But once again, there's a lot of comments, a lot of questions in the chat. One of them is for the SEEDS program. So this is probably something for you or Cassie. Bushwan mentioned that the SEEDS program is only for U.S. citizens. Is there a way for non-U.S. citizens to get involved by perhaps doing some type of international collaboration where their research would be represented by the U.S. students?
That's great. That's a great way of putting it, Peter. Because that is, to me, the opportunities. Because yes, our students are the C students are focused really on their particular location, but we're always looking for comparison locations. And one really good way is to follow the same latitude around the world. At 45 degrees north, where I tend to be located, halfway between the equator and the North Pole, what is happening there? And if we trace that line around, it goes right through, many countries and places in Europe, and that's one way that I would sort of pair people up, is what is happening at that same latitude or longitude in a location, so that we can have some comparison there. And we're always looking for things like this, to make sure that students, again, they're an expert in their community, but rarely will they have traveled to another place. So, this is what the GLOBE program really facilitates. And it always comes into that timing of most people are in school right now, and this group happens to be working during the summer. And so if you are one of those that has students during the summer, this is a really easy and good collaboration that all of us would help to facilitate and would be glad to facilitate. So reach out to us if you're going to actually be working during the summer or want your students to, collaborate like this, because coding languages is one of those things that is shared almost universally around the world. And I've found that that is a way that students can actually communicate, even though they may not speak the same language. They can speak the same Python code or the same computer code. So, that to me is a wonderful way that we can actually bring students together across cultures and have them be those experts and also work on something collaboratively.
Thanks, Peter. I just want to point out, Mike put in the chat a link to, looks like it's suncalculations.org, where you can go there and measure the shadow length based on location and time of day that the observation was made. So I wanted to point that out. So I also want to say that, as always, we have so much content, so much detailed content that Peter gets into. We often fall behind time. And so we want to apologize because on our agenda, we wanted to talk about we wanted to mention about the Miyawaki Forests. So I wanted to open the mic and invite Emmanuel to say a few things. Before you do, I just want to point out the importance of these types of webinars. When last time we talked, we met, he introduced us to these forests. I just happened to meet a member of the Alley Unified Libraries in Los Angeles, where they were going to open up 50 libraries and basically do more green space. They had these open areas. They wanted to plant regenerative agriculture or something. Just by being a part of this webinar, hearing Emmanuel and on the other speakers last month, I mentioned about the Miyawaki Forests. I always pronounce it correctly. She loved the idea, and she said, "Let's talk. I want to incorporate that into these 50 libraries in Los Angeles." So just shows you the importance of just coming to this meeting, listening to so many different things, educating yourself, and it can go from one presenter to myself to 50 libraries. So I thought that was a great idea. So Emmanuel, I'd like to ask you to unmute and say a few words, if you will.
Well, thank you, Peter Falcon. That's really great news to hear from Los Angeles. Peder Nelson, that is. As Brian mentioned, we had a fabulous webinar last month on Miyawaki Forest. It's pronounced Miyawaki, named after a famed botanist, Akira Miyawaki of Japan. Unfortunately, Peder Nelson, you missed it because you were not well. But I did send you coordinates for 2 Miyawaki forests in India, which you are going to analyze in terms of biomass as well as carbon sequestration. I was just wondering, did you manage to gather much data on this, or what's the status of this peer analysis?
Yeah, so this was one of those things that I was kind of going through is yes, I'm starting to put that together, Emmanuel, in terms of all of those different data layers that describe that particular location. And that was part of the reason why I wanted to spend some time today talking about that latitude longitude piece, because that, like I said, as people are planting these trees is a really important part of being able to monitor them, and being able to look at how far apart the trees are planted. All of those kinds of things are exactly what we wanted to bring in. But it all goes back to that latitude, longitude, and so I have some things here that I could pull up, but I think what I kind of went over today is exactly the type of tools or data that's available, and it all goes back to, is that latitude, longitude correct? And then what are the data layers showing at that location?
Well, you want me to answer that question?
Well, let me see. I was going to pull up a time series of that location, but yeah, Emmanuel, tell me a little bit. I think it would help all of us know, how long has this sort of been happening in different places? And, again, that kind of goes into what is the data that's available, and recognizing that there's a baseline that needs to go in, when we're thinking about monitoring changes over time, right? And so these ones that you explored, or that you did in India, give us a little bit of a rundown, shortly about, when they got planted, or kind of, a little bit of that piece of things.
Great question, Peter. Actually, I visited both those sites last month. I was invited to go and take a look. They are both in the state of Gujarat in Western India. One is a forest by the sea, and the second one in a city called Bhuj is the largest one in India. Now, I think they were planted about 2 years ago. And why is this important? Because several other experts that we brought together last month wanted to know what is the impact of Miyawaki forests. So these are things that are not well studied. Other than one study by Nicolas de Brabander, I hope I'm getting his name right, from Belgium, who had conducted his own study, there is very little data, for example, on how much carbon is sequestered in the soils, in the trees. Even though there are general, a review of the literature tells me that the carbon sequestered is almost 10 times of a normal natural forest. So there is interest, for example, on what will be the impact on heat, the heat island effect, because Miyawaki forest is being tried in cities. What is the impact on air pollution? What is the impact on carbon sequestration, noise pollution, and what is the impact on moisture or water retention? So these are some very important issues. And as this idea catches on around the world, the Miyawaki forest, to those who are not fully aware, can be as small as just 10 square meters. Just imagine 10 square meters, which is hardly any amount of space. And that's one of the reasons why people are excited. Maybe one of the reasons why the library in Los Angeles, Peter Falcon, wants to take a look at it. Here in Washington, D.C., where I teach at the University of District of Columbia, they're actually actively looking at it. And I think before the end of this year, hopefully they'll agree to take up at least 100 square meters. So that would mean roughly about 300 trees. So this is a fantastic idea because it can be planted almost anywhere. It can involve hundreds of thousands of students. Many schools around the world are doing it. Many neighborhoods are doing it. And therefore, it is, I think, very important for NASA or the GLOBE program to basically find ways in which we can monitor it and also look at its impact. Impact along the on 5 issues that I have raised, I think would be a very good start. And the reason why I gave you these coordinates, because you asked, is if you're able to get some data through your analysis, that will have a huge impact on India. Because several cities in India are taking up this Miyawaki forest, particularly to contain heat. Now, does Miyawaki forest provide an impact in that category? Review of the literature shows that yes, it does. It can reduce heat by as little as 2 degrees Celsius. There was a good example cited from, I believe, Melbourne, Australia, where the scientists took temperature of a Miyawaki forest, next to it a sidewalk and a road. And the difference was from anywhere from 19 degrees inside the forest to 59 degrees on the sidewalk. So these are some very interesting observations people have made. And to the extent that we can gather more data, provide more research, I think this will be a great contribution.
Thank you, Manu, and thank you, Peter. With the few minutes we have left, I'm going to turn over to Brian because I know Brian wanted to say a few things before we end for the day, and Mike also wrote like a nice comment in the chat box as well. So thank you for that, Mike.
All right, thank you, Peter, and yeah, apologize for going over time again, but that's kind of how we roll here with this the Trees Around the Globe Student Research Campaign. Lots of amazing stuff happening on time, and thank you, Emmanuel, and we'll definitely, of course, talk more about Miyawaki. And I know Mike Jabat's on here. Mike, can you say briefly, what you mentioned to me about the Miyawaki, what you guys are planning on doing, just so we can, have it from your perspective too?
Yeah, so we thank you, Emmanuel, for the last webinar. Just was fantastic. So I reached out. We have a number of no-mow zones on our campus. And so I reached out after the webinar to ask them about the possibility of maybe changing those no-mow zones into micro forests, I guess is how I described it. And so that's pretty exciting. It'll be a great great extension, I think, to the Earth system science work that we've been doing here. So thank you. It's with 3 feet of snow on the ground, it seems like it's a long ways away to get started, but it won't it won't be that much longer. We'll be trying to figure out how best to do it. But the idea of involving the community, both the campus community and the larger community in doing this, I think is pretty exciting. So
I've just mentioned my email in the chat box, so let's stay in touch.
oh, absolutely.
Perhaps I can help you. You can help me as well.
I love this. And, and one of the things that is really important as you go from a grassland to tree cover is that shadow part. And so I'm glad I spent a lot of time talking about that because, Mike, that is exactly the sort of changes that we would expect to see with this. And, Emmanuel, it took me a little bit, but I was finally able to get back to my screen here showing, one of the coordinates that you gave me, and the many different ways that we can look at that. The interesting thing I find is that, yes, there's increasing greenness, but there's some interesting trends that need a little bit further exploration and description. And this to me is why I emphasize so much of what I did earlier. You get the results back from NASA or from, a scientist showing you something. Well, what does this really mean in light of what you measured out there when you did your activities? What is sort of happening? And, this one right here is our average, greenness or vegetation index that we usually see. And there's just a lot that's going on back here that, might be explainable. It might be noise. It might be all kinds of things. But this is where our observations, your observations, might be able to describe what is happening along something like this. And that's really what I want to emphasize is you get numbers back, and that's the beginning of the investigation. Is what do these numbers mean? And what do they mean in relation to what Emmanuel, like what you were sharing with us earlier, or what our globe measurements were, right? And so I wanted to end with that one because I put in these coordinates a couple times, and I ended up in Russia. I ended up in the middle of the ocean, and so this is one of those things that, again, is this correct or not goes back to our coordinates and a lot of what we're seeing there. And so I appreciate everybody kind of going with me down this what can be a rabbit hole of numbers and screens and data tools. But this is open science. And so, I hope that you come back and ask us questions about what you've seen, what you've shown, and we want to really help you be successful in this International Virtual Science Symposium, as well as just doing good science in your classroom.
Hold on, I'm unmuting here. Let me go back here. All right, so Peder Falcon, can you see that? Sorry.
Yeah, looks good.
All right, cool. So yeah, yes, we went over and we are out of time right now, but I want to, take a minute or two just to go over this, and we're going to lead with this as we go into the February webinar, because as you know, we're still in the IVSS 2024 submission phase right now. But as you know, as a lot what Peder Nelson just talked a lot about, looking, trying to figure out the data, synthesizing the data, all the tools you can use, and are the locations there? These are all types of things that students work on during their research projects for IVSS and other ones, whether it's a local school or county or country, whatever it is. But I want you to think of these 3 questions, and we can talk a little bit for a couple minutes now, but then we're definitely going to talk more about it in the February webinar, which Peder and I will be talking about this week, more about for February webinar. We don't have a specific day for that yet, but we will be figuring that out very soon, and you'll be getting an email with that information. But a couple questions here. There's the long URL for that But and I'll show you here. I have some another URL here in a second. But will your students be submitting a 2024 IVSS research project? What are some student research ideas you are thinking of, and what do you need from the Trees campaign team? Now, I know there's a lot of things you can talk about or think about with those questions, but I really want you to do this because, you know, we've had a great success in the last, you know, the last 5 years or so, you know, with our campaign related IVSS projects from students around the world. These are just some examples of ones that I pulled out of the globe system. You know, we've had ones from Slovenia where they're looking at the trees in the Ljubljana Basin in Slovenia. We have one in the United States where, you know, looking at the carbon storage by looking at tree height data and land cover data and comparing that with the ground-based data with space-based satellite data, looking at the native versus non-native trees in particular areas. And then, you know, we had some other ones here. We had one from Nigeria looking at land cover, land use in the local environments in Nigeria. We had a tie-in, and I know Cassie and Peter are big on this, you know, how we tie a lot of the measurements like land cover and those carbon measurements with, you know, the mission mosquito or mosquito habitat mapper data. And this is one from Thailand from IVS 2020. And then we had some other ones from back in 2019 where Malta students were looking at, you know, the urban environment in parts of Malta, like Gozo, Malta, looking at the effects of trees on these urban temperatures. And then we have ones, you know, from Oman who submit to research projects every year to the IVSS, the Globe IVSS call. And this was, they were studying a particular tree, the mango tree, and they were looking at tree heights and land cover and carbon data from that area. So, you know, with these questions in mind, you know, I want you to, if anybody has some last minute ideas and thoughts or any discussion before we, you know, we end the webinar, that's great. But what I want you to do is to think about these for next month's webinar. And once again, you know, I apologize because we always go over, but we always have so much information to share, and we have such great you know, interaction with you, the participants at these webinars, that, you know, we're even excited that we actually go over time because we know that it's of interest, it's of importance, and there's a lot to cover at each webinar. You know, we don't want to make these 3, 4, 5 hour webinars, but let me mention one thing to put this in your heads is that, you know, 2 years ago, we did a longer, it was like a 5-hour workshop where we brought students in from around the globe community, from around the world, different countries, many different time zones, you know, from 15, I think it was, largest one was about 13 hours difference from when we were, from where I am here in eastern part of the United States. But we want you to, you know, let us know what your students are going to be submitting to IVSS. And we would like you to talk to your students about presenting in a, you know, a spring workshop. And that would probably be, it would be after the submissions. We don't want to, you know, take any time from your students during their research process. But, you know, in the April or May timeframe of 2024, as a major webinar for the campaign where we'd focus on having students present. And, you know, we've done this basically every year. We just 2 years ago, we had this longer workshop. But we don't want to do necessarily a 5-hour workshop again. We want to focus on some really great student research projects that were submitted to IVSS from around the globe community. So please keep that in the back of your brain and talk to your students about that, because yeah, we know the students love to do it. Some of them get a little nervous. We understand, but we really want the world to see the amazing work that you're doing with your students who are doing great research work for IVSS and beyond. So does anybody have any things they want to talk about with IVSS? I mean, if not, just please bring that information, because we will start off next week's webinar after the introduction, next 6 months webinar after the introduction, all about IVSS. When we want to open the floor even more, yeah, for that next month. So I will go ahead and stop my screen, stop sharing, and then come back to the main room. And if anybody has anything, please unmute. Or Peter, I don't know if there's anything in the chat.
No, just a comment from Bushra, who says it's a great idea to have students present their work. I think this is a great area to be able to share that and get some feedback. So yeah.
Yeah, and we do always love that because the students really feel, and we know that their research matters to everyone, but I like to have them present because then we add that next layer of how important that data is, and how important that research is to not just them and their location, but to all locations around the world, because a lot of the efforts that they do in their research and the questions they are researching and trying to answer holds true in other parts of the planet, in other parts of the 127 globe countries out there. Oh, and I should also mention, if you didn't check the chat out while Emmanuel was talking, I went and I put an image in there showing the two locations that Emmanuel was talking about with Peter, the largest Miyawaki forest and the forest by the sea. These are just two map images of these locations. I just want to thank everybody for hanging on here. But then, also, if you don't want to wait until next month's webinar, please feel free to email us some questions or concerns about IVSS that you'd like some help with, or also some topics that you'd like to see in the coming months as far as science topics that we could try to, pull in a NASA scientist or a scientist from another country who, may be able to talk more specifically about, the science that you're wanting to work with your students for your IVSS project. So thank you all so much for this. Any last minute thoughts, Peder Nelson? I know Peter Falcon has to leave. He's off to a meeting, but Peder Nelson?
Nope, I said it all today.
All right. Thank you, Peter. And thank you, everyone, for being here. Tomorrow, everything will be put online. I will be sending an email out with the recordings. So thank you all and have a great rest of the week.